What's up, everybody? Chester ARP Church Devotional Podcast. I'm Clint Davis, your host. Hey, thanks so much for being with us. We are reading today from the book of Ezra, chapter 4, beginning in verse 17. King Artaxerxes, the king of the Medo-Persian Empire, has received a letter from those who would oppose the returned exiles' attempt to rebuild the temple of God in Jerusalem. In the letter that he had received from those who were opposing the work of God, he was told that the city of Jerusalem was a place of sedition, a seat of rebellion, and that if he allowed them to rebuild the temple, they would once again rebel against his leadership and against his rule over them. So King Artaxerxes sends a response to these adversaries of the people of God in verse 17 and following, and that's what we read today. The king sent an answer to Rehum the commander and Shimshai the scribe and the rest of their associates who live in Samaria and in the rest of the province beyond the river. Greeting. And now the letter that you sent to us has been plainly read before me. And I made a decree, and search has been made, and it has been found that this city from old has risen against kings, and that rebellion and sedition have been made in it. And mighty kings have been over Jerusalem, who ruled over the whole province beyond the river, to whom tribute, custom, and toll were paid. Therefore make a decree that these men be made to cease, and the city be not rebuilt until the decree is made by me. And take care not to be slack in this matter. Why should damage grow to the hurt of the king? Then when the copy of King Artaxerxes' letter was read before Rehum and Shimshai, the scribe and their associates, they went in haste to the Jews at Jerusalem, and by force and power made them cease. Then the work on the house of God that is in Jerusalem stopped, and it ceased until the 2nd year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So word got to King Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes sends a response. Part of the letter that the adversaries had sent to King Artaxerxes claimed that the annals of Medo-Persian history would tell him and would record story after story, example after example of how Jerusalem was a place of sedition and rebellion, and that it has a history of not listening to those around it. And, of course, he makes a decree to go back and find out this information. Go back and read the history of our people and find out if, indeed, what these adversaries of the people in Jerusalem is saying is true. And, of course, what they are saying is true. And so, as a result of that, King Artaxerxes makes a decree and says, stop building the temple. And he sends word back through the same channels and says, go and stop them from building the temple. Make them stop from rebuilding the wall of the city of Jerusalem and the temple of their God, because we don't want them to be organized. We don't want them to reclaim their sense of identity and their place. We don't want them to kind of think about conjuring up the glories of the past, for they will be a problem to us if they do. And so he gives Shimshai and Rehum and their associates the authority to go to the Jews and make them stop at once. And King Artaxerxes says simply, do not be slack in this matter. In other words, make sure this is done as quickly as possible. Don't drag your feet. And of course, that's all the adversaries wanted. Those who opposed the Jews wanted the word from King Artaxerxes to go in and stop this work. And so they got what they wanted, and we're told in verse 4, then the work of the house of God in Jerusalem stopped. But before that, we're told that the associates, Rehum and Shimshai and their associates, went in haste to the Jews, immediately took seriously the command of King Artaxerxes, and, quote, by force and power made them cease. They basically went to the returned exiles who were now living in Jerusalem, and by force and with haste and power made them cease their work of rebuilding the temple, rebuilding the walls, rebuilding the city. And you can imagine, right? Let's just think for a moment. Let's speculate for a moment what the people of God, the Israelites, the Jews, would have been experiencing at that moment. They had been in captivity, in exile. They had returned from Babylon. They were there to rebuild the temple. They had begun the work, but prior to beginning the work, they had kind of spent all their time rebuilding their own homes, and they had a prophet come to them and say, hey, what are you doing? Get serious about rebuilding the temple. because they hadn't been building the temple. And God says, you must repent and start building my temple. So they start building the temple 20 years after they've returned, and they're starting to lay that foundation. And as they're rebuilding this temple, now they have this opposition come to them. And now they're being told, you cannot rebuild this temple by power and by force and with haste, in accordance with the decree of King Artaxerxes, which we know the decree of a Medo-Persian king could not be overridden. And so the king has, from on high, said, stop doing this. He's empowered these adversaries to make sure the Jews ceased doing the work that God had called them to do. What must they have felt like? What must their experience have been? In captivity, return, the joy of returning, right? The hardships and difficulties of returning and finding out that the land had been laying fallow and or had been taken over by other people who had moved into that particular part of the land. So they had to reclaim their homes. They had to reclaim the ground. They had to fight against nature, and they also had to fight against their enemies, those who would seek to keep them from reestablishing the work of God and reestablishing their lives there in Jerusalem. They go through that process. They have a prophet who comes and says, you spend way too much time on behalf of God. You spend way too much time fluffing your own nest. Now get serious about building my temple. So then they get serious about building the temple. They lay the foundation. When they lay the foundation, most of them break out in joy, but those who are older, who were members of the former temple, said this pales in comparison. So they weep in the sadness of their souls because they are unable to rebuild the temple the way it once was. And these people have, in nostalgia, romanticized the past. And so now they've got this challenge among themselves of what's the point. Some of them are asking, some of them are joyful, but you have this kind of joyous return, this struggle, this joyous laying of the foundation, this struggle, and now they're starting to build the temple, and now the king says stop immediately. And they are told to stop with force and power and haste. They have to be asking very difficult and challenging questions. God, where are you? Why are you doing this? I thought you sent us back. You wanted us to build this temple. We started building this temple, and now we can't do it because of the king's decree. What's going on here? You know, if we're honest with ourselves, we all kind of sometimes find ourselves in a similar situation. There's a temptation, there's a struggle, there's hardships, there's difficulties, and unexplained and unexpected things that come into our lives that keep us from doing the work of God. And God says, I want you to do it. But yet in his sovereignty and his providence, he allows you to interact with these things, or he even brings those things into your life, and you're sitting there going, where are you? Where are you? What's the purpose? You can identify with where they are. It's a tough situation. They're returning home, but man, it's been difficult from the time they got back. And that's where the faith has to come in our lives and in their lives. We're going to have hardship. We're going to have persecution. We're going to have difficulties in this world. We've got to trust our God even through it all. We will find out that in their search for testimony about Jerusalem's history, they will find not only was Jerusalem, yes, a place of, in a sense, rebellion against the king, a place of, quote, sedition against the rulers of the empires around them, and a place where great kings ruled in Israel's history. They will also find out that the king Cyrus sent them back to build the temple and provided everything they needed, and that the wrong that has been committed against them right now in this particular instance with King Artaxerxes and through these adversaries will be righted. And King Artaxerxes will tell these same people, sit down and shut up and let the people of God build their temple in Jerusalem because Cyrus said so. And so God is working. We know the rest of the story, but man, it's hard, isn't it? We've got to learn to trust God through it all. And their story is a story of God's faithfulness. And may we learn to trust God in the same way. You guys take care. God bless you. I'll catch you next time.